welcome you to our 2022 Steve Biko lecture. This lecture or webinar is part of the annual Steve Biko lecture that we host in collaboration with Umtapo Center. This year's webinar is being convened exactly 2 days after we mark 45 years since Steve Biko's brutal death at the hands of the apartheid police. The webinar is not only about reflecting on Biko's life as a liberation fighter, his teachings on Black consciousness, his selfless service to humanity, and even his brutal death. It is also about drawing inspiration and lessons from his life and teachings, and using those to map out a new future for our country, the continent, and the world. 45 years after his death, Biko's vision for humanity has still not been realized, as inequality and racism still prevails. This calls on us to keep asking ourselves one question: what is it that we must do for Biko's vision to be realized? As many of you may be aware, that in the 1970s, Biko was a student at our medical school at the then University of Natal, which is one of the two institutions that merged to form the University of KwaZulu-Natal. While Biko's political activism can be traced back to a very young age, it was at the University of Natal that Biko's political activism became pronounced. It was at that time that the doctrine of Black consciousness was sharpened. In his student days, Biko displayed a passion for knowledge generation and vigorous debates. This was evident in many of his writings. Those are some of the ideas that we, as the University of KwaZulu-Natal, also hold dear. It is therefore befitting that as UKZN, we host this webinar in his honor. The Biko annual lecture and other similar lectures are part of endeavors to create an intellectual environment where new knowledge is generated and acquired for the benefits of humanity. The University of KwaZulu-Natal continues to be one of the leading research-based institutions in the country. Research from our academics and students continues to influence and shape the world for better. It is our hope that this webinar today will also make a positive contribution to the efforts to build a better world. Ladies and gentlemen, with those few words, I would like to welcome you once again to this webinar. I have no doubt that all of us here will be empowered by the discussion here today. I will now hand over to our facilitator to carry on with the proceedings. I thank you.
Thank you, Sis Nama. I really thank you for having me again. I remember last year we had this conversation together, so I'm glad to be part of it again. So it's 45 years since the tragic death of Steve Biko, and I must say, just in opening, that I kind of saw the 45 years come and then go. I saw a couple of interviews being done on ETV and on a couple of news stations, but it wasn't quite the moment that I thought that the passing of Steve Biko ought to be and should be, and perhaps just a moment to say, when I was little, my parents were staunch Black consciousness supporters. When I was a young girl, I remember every year on the day candles were lit, and so in my subconscious, I think I imagined that the country ought to have been lit all around with candles in remembrance of Biko. I think, though, we don't meet here in order simply to stand at a proverbial grave and say, we honor and mark the passing and the life of Steve Biko, but rather to say, what does that mean for us going forward? What does his sacrifice have to mean for crafting a different way for us to live, to engage with each other, and to be people as we move in the world? And so I think that I look forward to this conversation, not just as a memorializing project, but one that truly makes the life of Steve Biko worthwhile because of the way it continues to shape how we see ourselves and see the world. Without speaking too much, I would like to introduce in turn each of our speakers today. They're really, for everybody else, we've got speakers who will make short presentation to us, but I think what is more important is that this is also an opportunity to share, to engage, and to touch base with each other, to really ask the questions that we feel perhaps we may be asking in our private spaces, but don't always have this platform to be able to fully engage with each other and ask questions and also just share our ideas. Keletso, just before I bring you in, if I could perhaps just ask you, in the song, the lyric that keeps touching me is the word, the man is dead, the man is dead, and that becomes an echo. And I think part of why we're here is kind of this idea that the man may be dead, but the idea does not die, right? That the man or the idea that he represented was bigger than him. And I just want to, 45 years on, what does the passing or the life of Steve Biko mean, and how do we find ways to actually ensure that the man does not die in our collective memory and in how we remember him?
Hey, good evening, and thank you so much for having me. Just to reflect on what we do to make sure that his memory doesn't die is we look at his principle, the very reason why he chose to give up his life. And the principle was for Black people to be able to see their own oppression and to do something about it. And so one needs to ask themselves if we are doing enough to ensure that there's enough of a critical mass that understands that mission, which is to ensure that Black people understand their oppression and that, in fact, they're doing something about eradicating that process. I think from my perspective, that is one way in which we could all remember Steve, is by ensuring that there is a liberation of the Black mind and that the philosophy of Black consciousness is a living philosophy, a spirituality that Black people live on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kekeles, I was slightly rude in how I decided to introduce everyone. The African way is to stop and everyone one at a time. But I think sometimes the Zoom way says hurry up, right? But perhaps you can, just before we go forward with everybody else, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit, who you are, where you come from, and what this means to you.
Thank you so much. I'm Kekeletso Kgena. I am the Deputy President of AZAPO, and this program in particular and this day is, I suppose it's been a moment. It's been a whole week of reflection. It's been a whole week of looking at what the organization that I represent, which is AZAPO, is doing. And it's been a whole week of looking at what I am doing. It's been a whole week of reflecting on where we are as a people in relation to 1977, in relation to the 70s, in relation to the 400 or so centuries of oppression. It's been also a moment where, because we had a pilgrimage where we went to the Eastern Cape, where we could get re-inspired by walking in the footsteps of this great man, to almost feel it, that palpable spirit of who he was and what he stands for, and to understand, I think for me, a renewal. It really has been almost like a renewal of the dedication to ensure that I and the organization can live up to his wishes and what he had laid his life for. It's been a renewal process for me. Rather than a process of mourning, I am invigorated and I'm excited to walk into this next step of ensuring that we can realize Azania.
Thank you. And just in case anybody doubted that I'm a feminist, I'll go again to another female speaker before I meet that at the end. Professor Nri Asi Lumumba, if I could ask you, just from your name, here I am, I'm making a lot of assumptions here. I'm just looking at your name, I'm looking at the background, and I'm assuming that you are more than the the majority here, which is mostly South African people, and Steve Biko being part of the story of South Africa. And I just wanted, in yourself introducing yourself, I'll kind of segue and throw in my own question before everybody else does, and just kind of say, what I noticed in the video we played before was how so many people from all over the world were part of that, of creating that video, creating that music, but also creating that movement. And I just wanted to see how this particular movement resonates with you as someone who is necessarily not part of our borders as we see them, but I think part of a greater identity of who and what we are.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure and quite an honor to be here with you today and to be associated with the commemoration of one of the brightest, one of the sharpest, one of the most dedicated sons of Africa. So I come to you from different places. When you were speaking, I was thinking of my daughter, who is now postdoctoral fellow at Brown. She's in technology, also an artist, and who says, I am more than what I'm reporting, what is reported. So when you spoke, I thought of my daughter immediately. I'm from Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa. And have been teaching, I'm speaking to you today from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. And I'm also still affiliated with the university back home in Côte d'Ivoire. Here at Cornell, I also serve as the director of the Institute for African Development. And I'm based in the Africana Studies and Research Center, which just lost a giant of the generation of Steve Biko, Professor James Turner, who created the idea of Africana studies, not African studies, not African American studies, not diaspora studies, Africana, meaning psychologically, historically, the continent is connected to its space, the other people in other places. So we just lost him after 50 years of battle and creating the Africana studies. So I want to acknowledge him. I'm also associated with South Africa per se, because I'm a fancy title, Distinguished Visiting Professor at the University of Johannesburg. So I am connected to different places. Although I'm speaking physically today from the United States, Ithaca, New York. So I don't know when, as I mentioned to you earlier, I had prepared a few slides to make sure that I don't forget. In French, they say aide-mémoire. So it's kind of helping myself to make sure I go through all the points. So when do I?
In just a moment, I just would like
so that's my general introduction to thank you, thank those who thought of inviting me, and I'm honored to be in the company of so many great and dedicated fighters.
Thank you. And Dada Masala, when I left the house and I told my parents I was coming here, they said, "Ooh, Masala can speak that one. He's going to be fire, I know." So you come with a lot of expectation on my side. But I just had a question. A lot of what I had been taught about Black consciousness seemed like it involved a lot of doing and a lot of active and a lot of being actually present and involved in what you were doing. And just as, again, as a segue of allowing you to introduce yourself, but if I can just ask and say, how what is it, this inertia that keeps the idea of Black consciousness alive? I think more than just an idea, it must have been something for it to be so powerfully palpable for some of us. If you can just kind of say what perhaps in the 1970s and 60s, what this movement looked like from that point of view.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and greetings to all the comrades who are on the program and all of the other people who are participating with us here today. My name, as you've heard, is Itumele Mosala. I am the former president, 3 times president of AZAPO, the Azanian People's Organization, and recently the Black Consciousness Movement united. Sometimes we say uniting because we think that at the core of Black consciousness is the quest to unite Black people nationally and internationally, to unite the struggles of Black people, the purposes of Black people, the things that make us tick, to hold them together, because that is how the movement started. I'm a founder member of the Black Consciousness Movement. I walked the roads with Steve Biko. I participated in the conferences that created us right in the beginning, in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And you're absolutely correct. This movement is a movement that was born in action. Some of the very first events that created this movement, we didn't get together and hold a conference and create it ourselves. By the time we held conferences, we already existed in the campuses, we existed in the universities around the country. We were in the streets, we were in the villages, we were building schools in the Eastern Cape, in the rural areas. We were building clinics, we were manning clinics. We all know the story of Mampela Rampela, who was the strong veteran of our movement who ran a clinic while she was a student medical doctor. And we can talk about many others who were doing different things. There were priests amongst us, there were student theologians, there were scientists amongst us, there were poets amongst us, there were communities amongst us. We built all kinds of things. We are a movement in action. And in fact, if we are to recover ourselves as a Black consciousness movement, we need today, this day and age, we need to say less and do more.
And a word of his and a man of his word. You did say less and do more, but said it just pointedly and with just what we needed. Thank you so much for the 3 panelists for an introduction and allowing me to steal my way into starting a conversation of sorts. If when I'm looking at the program, I will then, as the professor had said, give each one of you a slot to be able to reflect on your thoughts on the 3 themes that have been given. I have been given the very difficult task of kind of putting my finger up and asking us to move on to the next part of the discussion. So when I do so, please just be cognizant of that. And Dada Mosala, it starts with you, and I think the theme that you were given was a nation in crisis is because quest for a true humanity moving further away from the horizon. it's a foreboding and a scary thought, but I think one that we must be honest about and must be able to have a conversation about with each other. I think if I can just leave it for you there for about 10 or 15 minutes to kind of just lead us through that part of the discussion, I'd appreciate it.
I hope I can say it in less time than that. Yes, absolutely. Again, I think you've put your finger right on it. I remember when Steve uttered those words, that it really, really felt much closer than I feel about it now. We were there, we were getting there, we were pushing apartheid, we were shaking the foundations, we were fearless, we were dying, we were in prison, we were unrattling everything, and those who thought they could keep their foot on our necks for a long time knew that it was it was not doable any longer. It wasn't going to have to be so for much longer. And so it was actually a moment of brightness. It was a time when we had an absolute sense of victory. Victory was smelling everywhere, and we were not being sloganeering when we used to say things like "in our lifetime." But unfortunately, absolutely unfortunately, I think if Steve Biko were to come back from the dead now, he would say something like, the struggle is going to be on for a long time to come, because this country and this nation is absolutely in crisis. I tried to reflect in whatever way I could what we actually mean by crisis. In my other profession, I read classical languages, and I tried to find out whether in Greek or in Latin or in Aramaic or Syriac or even in Hebrew, whether I could find a term and concept that could make me match what we are witnessing, what we are feeling now, with what the concept of crisis means. And I must say that given the experience that I've just come from, I didn't say that I'm currently the secretary of the Zondo Commission, and we've had 3.5 years of staring into what is actually a horror movie with regard to how we look, how our country look, how our country has reformed itself. We are a nation in crisis. We have a crisis of national identity, a crisis of national failure to cohere. We are not one people. We are not self-knowing. We are far away from the things that we tried to do through the Black consciousness people, and the things for which Mapetla Mohapi died, the things for which Steve Biko died, the things for which people like Mekwari, who stood as an adult amongst us at the time, stood firm and strong and even against her own family to take the suffering that was being meted against us. We do not have that cohesion. We are not about to have that cohesion. We're not one people. We're not a nation. We don't have an identity. We have a crisis of morality. And I'm not talking about morality in the individualistic Western Christian sense. I'm talking about peoplehood. I'm talking about nationhood. I'm talking about togetherness. I'm talking about national sensitivity. We're in trouble. We're in trouble. We don't know the difference between right and wrong. In fact, it doesn't matter any longer in this country. If you want to kill, you kill. If you want to steal, you steal. If you want to disrupt education, you disrupt education. If you want to disrespect, you disrespect. We have a crisis of leadership. We have no leadership in our country. When we were outside the country and people were saying to us, we hope you people are learning. We hope you are taking note of how things can fall apart. We denied. We were in serious denial. We said, never, not us. We've seen all of you from Cairo to the Cape, from one part of the continent to another. We have learned the lessons. It will never happen when we take over South Africa. We have not been able to generate a leadership that could bring about those things that Biko talked about. No political vision, no commitment. We have a crisis of economic understanding. We don't know what we are doing. We don't know what economics is. We have no sense of analysis. We keep qualifications. We wear gowns. We attend events of people who are supposedly educated. We mistake qualification for education. We have a crisis of technical know-how. We can't do anything. You go into government, people don't know what to do. You go into churches, people don't know what to do. You go into universities, you look back and say, whatever happened to universities? Whatever happened to the morality of national and social institutions? We are people in a state of absolute crisis. Worst of all, we're in a crisis of defeat vis-a-vis racism. We remain the most racist society in the world. We remain the most unequal society in the world. We will never come out of the nightmare that we've just seen for ourselves. That I was telling people in another platform yesterday that at the Zondo Commission, we were able, in a space of 3.5 years, to collect data on corruption, just on ourselves as South African, of 3 times the size of Johannesburg. That's how much evidence and data on corruption was collected. And I'm sure if we kept on for another 6 months, that would be more. And so we are in crisis. That is my point.
Baba, if I may ask, I think Kekelezo said this is a moment of reflection and rebirth and so on. But you started with, you remember walking these days with Biko. What does the acknowledgement of the level of crisis compared to your lived experience of the price and the sacrifice it took to get us here? What does that, and I'm not talking necessarily from a highbrow political point of view, I'm simply asking you from a personal point of view, what does that mean and what does that feel like? Because often I see people of your generation and I wonder what living through today must feel like, having lived through what we went through already.
Yeah. I think we were inspired by the fact that we had already factored in the ultimate price. We were so seized by the vision of freedom and by desire for freedom and equality that what it cost to achieve it was already factored in. So nothing was going to stop us. I don't get a sense that that's where we are at the moment. I see people, I always tell people the difference between a revolution and a rebellion. I see people rising up because they are paining, they are hungry, they are frustrated. The difference between how they respond and how we responded at the time is that we had a vision of a revolution that would completely transform things, not things that would accommodate us into things that other people have access to. We wanted the old South Africa to die and the new South Africa to rise. We had already looked death in the face, and so we were never surprised. Remember that when Steve died, he was the 45th person, I think it is, to die in police detention. We were not afraid to fight with the police in detention. We were not going to stop. We were going to fight on and on and on. And that is what particularly black people are no longer angry. They're not angry. If they are, they're not angry enough. Black anger has been captured. People define for us and design for us how we should be angry.
Sure, I think in our time it would make for a really trending tweet or a t-shirt where people say black anger has been captured. But I think what you've said is terribly deep and does not require just a glib thought to just pass it by. But thank you very much, Ntate Mosala, just for your contributions to the conversation. Kekeletso, if I can come to you, literally passing on the baton from Ntate and the generations that have come. But I'm really excited to see young Black women part of the movement in this manner. You know, often people think that Black consciousness and kind of the conscious woke can be a bit sexist and so on. So when I see women taking positions of leadership, I'm like, you know, don't let the stereotypes get in your way. But I see on the program you are going to address the idea that can a future Azania emerge from the South African chaos, a Black consciousness perspective. That's a lot. I'll give it to you. I won't try and answer it.
And I also don't think I actually have the answers. You know, it actually is very, very daunting to be in the presence of great people like Professor Mosala and Professor Asiya Lumumba. Thank you so much for having afforded me the opportunity to be amongst such greatness. And to everyone that's watching this webinar, thank you so much and good evening to all of you. You know, as we reflect on the teachings of this great liberation giant, Biko, who gave us his life so that we could realize one nation, one Azania. One is asked to reflect on Azania as a shattered dream, or one that we can dare to imagine a new order. You know, we know that ZAPO predicted what would happen with the negotiated process in the 1990s. And in fact, it did happen. The negotiated settlement shattered the dream of realizing Azania, a land restored to its rightful owners, a land whose wealth could be used to benefit its people, a land whose biodiversity would feed and heal its people, a land where the owners would not live like beggars whilst the thieves lived like kings, a land where being Black was not associated with self-hate, with indignity, with pity, a land where the color of my skin could naturalize my proletariat state of being and did not preclude me from participating in the economy, a land where the Black men would have beaten the self-fulfilling prophecy of the Swart Gevaar, a land where the Black man would have been reconciled to himself so that he would stop bleeding all over himself, all over his people, and all over his future. And sadly, as I speak of healing, I'm reminded of a visual in a presentation that was done by Professor Janine Tihirageza of Burundi, who now lives in Chicago. And this visual reminded me of the brutal violence of King Leopold of Belgium, who had instructed his minions to cut the limbs of those who dared not to meet the rubber quarters that he had given. And a few years later, the Tutsis had to bear that same pain of having their limbs cut by the Hutus. This reflection of how we learn from our oppressors. And this happened, of course, during the 1994 Random Genocide as well. It seems 1994 was a cursed year for all of us, because remember, for us, 1994 gave us a government of a broken people who had learned from their colonial masters how to break the spirit of our people, how to oppress and create a a state of people who were dependent on them, how to control the anger of the masses, and how to pacify and silence the voices of our people using a brutal state machinery. We saw them do that with Marikana. We saw them do that with the Fees Must Fall movement. We saw them use the same tools that were used against them to further oppress our people and to further put our people in a state of poverty and indignity. We've seen them how in the last 30 years, they have failed, completely failed to eradicate pit toilets and bucket system, because all of those nemikuku are the reserve of Black people. We have seen how 1994 ushered in a betrayal of the struggle of our people and the subsequent derailment of the mission to liberate Azania and her people. Indeed, a dream was broken. But can we really dare to imagine a new order? Well, I think we can. And we start by telling the truth. We can start by being honest with each other. A TV anchor, I think all of us know him, JJ Tabane, recently joked about the movement of Biko being an intellectual boutique with no relevance today. Well, parts of his statements are quite true. The organization of Biko is blessed with leaders who are considered great thinkers, prolific writers, and orators who can articulate the Black condition. But the truth is, what value is our ability to articulate the Black condition to the landless, unemployed masses of Black people? What value is our knowledge of Frantz Fanon, Mao, Engels, Marx, and others when the Black condition has largely stayed the same? Our knowledge of Big English is not actually helping us to challenge the corrupt state into a public debate or either to expose the bigotry of this current government. Oh, we sit and we wait patiently to be given a spot on TV and on radio and maybe a little article at the back of a corner of a newspaper somewhere. Some may say that I'm being harsh, but the truth of the matter is that those people are not looking to ensure that the message of Biko reaches our people, because if it did dare to do that, then the many masses of our people would rise against this capitalist, imperialist state, and they would pull it down and destroy it. And this, of course, would affect the profits of those who owns the TVs, the radios, and the newspapers. So people call it harsh, and some people may call it ignorant and maybe youthful foolishness for me to be saying these things, but I hope that it does express my frustration with the status quo. This need for Black consciousness to maintain decorum and restraint in articulating the truth. The truth is, this incompetent and wounded caretaker government has never been in power. We know that. We're just not telling our people that this incompetent government has never had power. We have always been in control of our original colonizers and the hegemonic global demon called the UN and the power and resource-hungry dragon of the East Coast China. If not, why have we in the many years failed to tell our people that the incompetence of the caretaker government in managing our ports and borders is what enables a toothpick that is made in China to land in South Africa a whole lot cheaper than a toothpick made in Ekurhuleni? Because we know that these Chinese companies are allowed to bypass duty fees and under-declare the value of the imports, that making it impossible for local companies to compete with the dragon state. This denies us the opportunity to industrialize and create the much needed jobs and business ownership that we so need to be able to grow this economy that was never ever designed to include Black people. With our careful speak and working on eggs and our apologetic approach to liberation, I hardly doubt that we can realize the shattered dream of a liberated Azania. The truth is, the liberation of Azania requires us to go back to the principles of Ubantu Biko. These founding principles are anchored on the concept of doing, like Ndata Mosala was saying. When they were doing things, it was not rhetoric. Ubantu did not just write. Even when he couldn't leave his home or meet with his comrades, he did things. They brought to life things like the clinic. They brought to life the Leatherworks Company. They brought to life the Ginsberg Trust. They brought to life many things in trying to ensure that their communities could benefit from this idea of Black consciousness and self-reliance. They did things. They didn't use sloganeering. Which brings me to mind this idea of slogans that we use. There's one popular slogan that we love as Black consciousness people, and it goes, Azania is our land, we will not buy it. And yet, let's be honest, how many of us continue to invest in property? Many of us have spent millions buying property, buying the very land that was stolen from us. And we argue we do this because of the current dispensation. Who then is supposed to change this dispensation if we are part of it? For those of us who have found a gap in this exclusive system and economy, we are willing participants of the thuggery that leaves many of our people behind. The fact and the truth is, we are not as affected as the millions of Black people we claim to represent. The struggles of our people is removed from our daily lives. And until we go back to the principles of Bantu Biko and fight for the restoration of the land to its rightful owners and stop pacifying our people and stop being part of a system that enables us to further oppress our people. Having encountered this great Messiah of our time, during the pilgrimage that I went to, I spoke earlier about having had a pilgrimage, having walked the footsteps, having gone to where this great Messiah is lying, having gone to the cell where he was lying in stone cold. I thought about and reflected about this man and what would have inspired him to make this selfless self-sacrifice. To think about a man who stood there naked, beaten, purple, maroon, and blue, and hungry, and still refusing to eat the food that was given to him because the people who were giving him that food were the people that were hurting him and the people that were hurting his people. That's who he was. I had an opportunity to have an encounter with this great man and realize that I myself sit here, I'm probably part of the problem of sloganeering because I am yet to realize and deliver the Azania this man died for. And to me, I then realized when I was contemplating what it is that I needed to say tonight, that Azania needed leaders, not demigods. We needed leaders that can be found amongst our people. They must be found amidst the pain of our people. They must be found leading the struggles of our people and not philosophizing and writing strategic documents. The leaders of our people must be found doing the work. To realize Azania, we need a critical mass of people who know that the system oppresses them, and that they must do something to change their circumstances in their lives. And I'm thinking of Babu Steve Biko, and I'm thinking, this is what he was about. He says, let us go back, let us conscientize our people, let us open the minds of our people, let them see for themselves so that they can feel their own discomfort and do something about them. He didn't say that we must create demigods that claim to represent our people and subsequently betray their vision and the mission to liberate Tanzania, because it was this demigod idea and this demigod leadership that sold the vision and the aspirations of our people. 1994 was derailed because of this very demigod idea of leadership. To realize Azania, it is the critical masses of this country, and we need to build a critical mass of people who understand that the system is not working, cannot and will not work for them, and therefore they must destroy it. The five of us cannot deliver Azania. The people must liberate themselves. To liberate Azania, we need a selfless leadership. A leadership that understands that the truth of the matter is that we must forego our investments. and our middle class status to realize the freedom and the liberation of all of us. Because the truth of the matter is that we sit here with our big English and we sell the dreams and the aspirations of our people. We need a Sankara and Biko-like leadership that is willing to do what many call a class suicide. We need a sacrificial type of leadership to educate, to train, and to inspire the masses to go and fight for themselves, because the system that we have bought into, this constitution and its bodies, is not about Black people. What I know of this current constitution is that I have seen it get rid of what they were trying to do, which is BEE, which really didn't serve us. But there was at least a semblance of trying to do something. It went on to destroy that because it didn't serve white people. This document was written to serve the interests of white people. And the stupid people who were hoodwinked into taking a settlement that was never going to serve them or their people, and now realizing that this document will never serve them, but they do not have the 75% majority that would actually ensure that they could change this thing around. Why? Because this document was written to protect itself. So what we thought was a document or a structure of democracy, a government by the people, for the people, is actually not. It is a government by a piece of paper and Roman Dutch law. So the reality of the situation is that, yes, we lost out an opportunity to realize Azania then, but we can still do that if we ensure that a critical mass of our people understand their oppression and that they're doing something to actually realize it. I will stop here for now. Thank you so much.
Keke, I know you have load shedding there, but there must be a fire burning where you are. So however you go, there will be light. I just love to see when a Black woman shines in all her Black woman magic and is not like, demure lady, like we are quiet, because we cannot be quiet at the moment as we face it. Thank you so much for what you've said. What I thought was really interesting in what you said, and I noted for myself a change in language when you rather speak of a critical mass, you speak of us, right? That often in the paradigms of the democratic dispensation, we will often rather speak my colleagues are here, we would rather speak of the people, our people, but that's always like a coded speak for the people they are willing to sacrifice and the people on whom they are willing to move. So I rather appreciated that for once someone wasn't speaking from a platform and saying, our people, the people, where they actually just mean the people on which we are willing to walk on in order to get to where we need to get. So I really appreciate your comments and your feedback. Prof, I'm going to come to you now. Before we have if I can see from the comments on the side, we will have a lively discussion when we're done. I will encourage everyone to be able to post questions onto the thing. If you see some of the settings, there's a thing about questions there. If you post a question, I'll be able to read it later. I'm not sure. Technology sometimes beats me, so I'm not sure if everybody will be able to engage, but in that question area you're able to post your questions, and I'll definitely try my best to represent as many as I can. Prof, just not in closing, but just to be able to add some of your thoughts on this. You were given the task of having to think around the idea.
I've just lost everything.
You are back. I can hear you. I think we've lost the speaker. We've lost the...
You will come back.
But we can hear you. We can hear everybody except the program director.
Okay, so what shall we do?
I'm just hoping that the rest of the participants here, but I can hear you very, very well. I could hear Keke just now.
Okay, so my question is, she was asking me to come in, but she didn't finish her thought.
Yes,
So
that's true.
maybe,
Yeah.
shall we wait for her, find out?
Yes, let's wait a few
because-
minutes.
Yeah, because I don't want, in the meantime, we read the, you know, the chats. Very
Yes.
helpful. Yeah.
Don't. I've locked video. What? I need to fix this thing.
I think she'll come through. She'll come back. She froze before she disappeared. I suppose there's a load shedding problem.
Yeah. You are muted.
Oh, I understand that the rest of the audience can hear us and they can see us. So I'm not sure, Prof, whether you don't want to continue. There's a message on the chat that says the rest of the audience can hear us and can see us.
So do we decide that I should go ahead?
I think you can. There'll be no difficulty in going back to the staff when the chairperson comes, if it turns out that
Okay.
um,
Okay. Do you see my
slide. Yes,
slide?
I do.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't want to make it so formal because it's a conversation about these great issues, challenges of our time. But I use it, as I mentioned earlier, as an aide-memoire to make sure that I address the different points that I wanted to contribute. So I'm going to start and thank everybody again, those who invited me, these illustrious colleagues with whom I'm sharing this the panel here, and the audience, all the very enriching commentaries in the chat box. So my arguments here are based on 3 concerns: the concern of how we embrace history, and the concern of how we conceptualize education, because it's one of our major problems. If the system continues to reproduce, even among ourselves, those who can continue the system of oppression, then it will not matter if those who are in power, those who sign papers, look like us. That's the fundamental point that I want to make. So my point here is that we are in this fast-paced world with the technology. When you acquire some competency about how to use some, another one comes on. But in this illusion that we're moving, while actually in some contexts we are regressing in terms of the well-being of our people, in terms of the hopes, and so on and so forth, we need to make sure that the conceptualization of the issues and the practical ways in which we plan to contribute change are really well done. So in that conceptualization, we need to have this, what has been considered different moment in human history, the past, the present, and the future. In another talk, and I don't want it to be too an intellectual abstract, but actually the present per se philosophically doesn't exist, because as soon as I finish this sentence, it's no longer, it's not anywhere. It's part of the past. But we need to think in those terms of where we're coming from, thinking of the long history, where we're coming from, why we got to where we are. before we can think of how to imagine a different future. So that's what was in my title, Reimagining the World to Come, and Ubuntu Inspired Education for Humanity. And I make it clear here, for humanity. So for the Africans and the rest of the world, because one thing is that they will never give up. Those who created the system of oppression and of exploitation, they will never give up. So they, just like the illusion of development, they will not say, okay, these African countries, all these other societies have lagged behind, we have put them behind. Let us, on moral point, wait for them to catch up, then we move together. It will not happen. Actually, the gap keeps widening. So similarly, in terms of the education system, they will not think of a different system that will liberate the mind. To use some of the term by great thinkers who have written about it, Wathiongo, and many other African scholars. So I like to quote, when I'm speaking in this kind of context, this specific word from an African-American historian, John Henry Clark, because it captures so well where we are and what we need to do. It says, what is the meaning of history? So history is not a subject matter that you're free to learn or not to learn. That's not what it is. John Henry Clark states in his work titled The Great and Mighty Walk, where he says that when Africa was leading the way, Europe was in darkness. So that's very important. So he says history is a clock that people use to tell the political and cultural time of the day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells the people where they have been, what they have been, where they are, and what they are. And most important, he argues, history tells the people where they still must go and what they still must be. That's very powerful. So who defines what we must be? And this is where the education comes in. And the other dimension of my talk also is to use this, you have seen this Sankofa bird presented in different stylistic way, but the essence of the Sankofa is that we need to look back. It doesn't mean we need to walk back, because it's not possible. We need to look back to know where we're coming from. Going back to John Henry Clark, we need to know where we're coming from, how we got to where we are, what are the factors involved, so that we can understand what is the meaning of where we are. We understand the challenges, and so that we can think critically of where to go, using our full agency, having understood, having dissected where we're coming from, the history, how we got to where we are, the contradictions, the possibilities, how to build on the achievement, how to critically address some of the issues that existed in that past. And then the future. In the Sankofa bird, there is that egg that in some analysis they miss. The bird is what symbolizes the future. It's delicate. Don't drop it. And we have been dropping the future, jeopardizing it, as some of the policies reproduce what put us in very weak position continuously over the decades. So these are the two things, both the history, meaning of history is different component, and recapturing our agency. So that's what it is. Let me quickly go through it so that we can have the time for interaction. So then that reimagining the world, a Sankofa and Ubuntu foundation, is that the philosophy of education must be clearly articulated. The education we have inherited is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, to really put us in a position where we will take over from those who are oppressing and oppress ourselves. That's what it is. So what is the nature of that education? So to effectively address the challenges of the moment and imagine a future, we have to acknowledge in this, using our agency, this the different moments that are connected. So what do we learn from that past? What has the past taught us? You see, I think one of my predecessors spoke about when the struggle was going on at some point in South Africa. The sentiment was that they had learned from the other part of the continent. They have seen how things fell apart, and that they will be well prepared to make sure that they learn from those lessons. Why is that? Those lessons have not been learned. Well, there's a system of reproduction that exists to pass the baton to the formerly oppressed so that they can continue the work. So then we need to recapture the meaning of education. It's not the technical competencies that are provided. What do you do with the technical competence? Technical competence was also included in the education that was designed in the African context. Read the historian, the major scientist, Sheikh Anta Diop. So what are the guiding principles in acquiring the technical competencies, and for what purpose we use them? So these are some, so I'm going to skip a few here, and so that we can move to the question and the discussion. So this is what I represented here to summarize a lot of what I have been saying. And I want to emphasize the humanity. The humanity is not only the humanity of the Africans, but then some have asked, why do we want to carry the responsibility of the entire world? Well, the point I made earlier is that they're not going to rest. So we cannot create a world that works for us while they realize that they have been losing. There are ways in which the disruption will continue. Therefore, we need to think of the humanity in terms of common human existence, human being, but also the humanity as the world. So a little bit, maybe let me move to this thinking of the COVID. What the COVID has taught us is the basic idea that we need to have the humanity in mind, that our collective well-being is interconnected, because we share the same planet. We share the same territories that have been artificially divided. So more than ever, we need to reflect on how do we reconceptualize education to produce technical competencies, scientific knowledge that will benefit all. So that I think I have a few more, but I think I would like to leave it here so that we can engage in the discussion. I will finish by going back to what Mwalimu Mazrui said, that we don't need to think of resolving our own problem alone, because we're not living in isolation. And we have the capacity, using our philosophy, our thinking, our conceptualization of humanity, we need to think of the whole world. It is possible. So I will leave it there. And I thank you again for having given me this opportunity.
Okay, may I find out
Yeah.
if the facilitator is back? Thank you
Oh,
so much,
yes.
Prof.
Eskom thought
Thank
it would
you.
have the better of us, but I'm back.
Okay.
down with ESCOM, down.
Oh, no, no, no. This is why I'm sitting in a dingy corner, because I knew this corner would come in handy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ama, for I think I caught a majority of your presentation, and I thought it was really, really powerful. One of the things that for me, and I think I must have been a teenager, but that really grabbed my mind was exactly this idea of the quest for a true humanity. And it wasn't so much about the idea of having a burden of responsibility for people who are not like me, but simply the idea of thinking about the level of brokenness that I could see within my community. You know, I think Ndade Musala spoke well about the levels of brokenness that we are experiencing, but also thinking about how broken it must be to be so abusive to other people. So to have a group of people who in their lived DNA, in their history, have such a legacy of cruelty and brutality must in and of itself be an unaccounted for level of trauma, and a thing that represents a break with one's sense of their humanity. So I really think what you are saying about does this mean we have to be responsible for each other? Well, one, because I think COVID said, I am my brother's keeper. But I think the second one is to fully say, to be that cruel, to be that heartless, to be that devoid of the sense of being able to see the suffering of others is in and of itself a signal that something is broken with you. And I think we have not yet fully addressed this issue. And I think as we address, you know, things like the TRC and we address our own trauma, we haven't yet said, how traumatized must you guys be to keep for centuries, for millennia, keep doing this to other people? What's the matter? What's wrong? Can we talk about this, please? So, Prof, I really thought that was really powerful. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming from the attendees, and I'm really appreciating that. I'm rather seeing it in the chat section. There is a Q&A section if anybody's interested. I just had a question for Ndade Musala. I saw there was it was Vishanti earlier on had a question, and she said that it seems that the way we have framed the idea of Blackness in this conversation is not the same as the way she understood it, say, in the 1970s. So that the idea of Blackness was not Verwoerd's idea of Blackness in how he divided us. But in my own experience, I've known colored communities, Indian communities, people within the broader African diaspora, all of them taking part in our movement. And I kind of wanted, perhaps if you could reflect on this idea of what are we, when we now stand and say we're part of the Black consciousness movement, are we still talking about the same thing we were talking about before, where we were talking of all the oppressed people of the world? Or are we simply now conforming to a very racialized sense of our history and our sense of identity?
Well, certainly Black consciousness has not moved away from the concept of the unity of the oppressed. And that was why it was not completely identifiable with the color of the skin. It had connections with it and origins in the blackness, in the color of your skin, because your existential reality was defined on the basis of the color of your skin, but your experience of oppression was the same experience of oppression of other Black people, what used to be called non-white people. We shared oppression, therefore the call from Steve Biko and other leaders was we should share our response to oppression and exploitation. We were, and just to bring in the other question that was asked, that Steve Biko absolutely understood, and the movement did, in my memory, understand that the origins of all of these things was colonialism and capitalism. And of course, colonialism and capitalism have been remaking and reshaping themselves. Today we talk about neoliberal dispensations, neoliberal economics, neoliberal discourses. But for black people all over the world, whether it is black people in the United States of America, whether it is black people on the continent, or black people in Europe, or black people anywhere, there is an issue about their blackness. Their blackness coincides with their class position in all of those societies. And so when we say we are black, we're talking about the blackness of our blackness, and at the same time, we're talking about the political core that goes with our blackness. And so we ought to fight together. We ought to struggle together. I was just answering Vishanti's question here about what is it that we must do. My view is, as we did then, we need to reunite in the streets. We need to go back to where we were before we were all captured out of it, before we were deceived about a new constitution that said nothing about black people, said nothing about Africa, said nothing about history. It was a purely technical, legal document that we're being held to ransom against it at the moment. And as much as all of us would like to say we are in a constitutional dispensation, and I'm the last person to not want to disparage that in itself, but questions ought to continue to be asked whose constitution it is. Questions ought to be asked whose economy is this that we are in. We've never had the economy back to us. We never have been part of this economy. Whose government is this? You know, it's in our name, but does it look like us? I don't think so. And I think everybody knows across political parties. And one of the problems are that we've never, ever reflected properly and deeply about where party politics or party political organizations originate from. They come from bourgeois historical class relations. And that was why in Africa at the beginning of freedom, the leaders used to say Europe can have a multi-party this and multi-party that, but those are just multi-class struggles. We are a nation first before we are a class. But class and race, of course, in the Black consciousness movement has always gone together. In Azapo, we made it absolutely clear that all the black people, we are ashamed to see that we've not only reinstalled tribalism, which is rampant today. We had done such a good job to destroy tribalism before the so-called freedom in our country, but also homelandism, so to speak. You know, all these little things that were created by the apartheid state, the colors, the blacks. It's a shame that today, when people want to talk about blacks of African descent, they isolate them as the blacks and the rest are not blacks. It's an absolute shame. And that is why I am so pleased that we are having a problem with the Western Cape. I'm glad that we're having a problem with the Western Cape because we dropped on blackness. You know, in the Western Cape, we used to fight as black people and to resist as black people, to embrace ourselves as black people because we were oppressed, all of us as blacks. I don't know what are colors. Why don't you call ourselves Bantus now that we accept other people to be Indians and then blacks? We've just dropped the ball too badly.
Yeah. I spent part of last week in some of the neighborhoods in Roodepoort side, and everybody, for all intents and purposes, looked like me, seemed like me, except they identified different from me. And in that, when they spoke, I understood quickly in the South African terms that, oh, okay, that one is a different race, so to speak. And so there was that difference, right? And so I really think like this thing is keeping our poor people poor, and it's a fake divide that is serving someone, and certainly not our own people. Prof, someone was just asking, how do we aspire towards Ubuntu and an Ubuntu-inspired education against the contextual realities people face today, among so many structural constraints and other socio-economic challenges? I think the person says, I'm just thinking of the proposal to say put alcohol into schools. How do we even begin to think about an Ubuntu-inspired education in a time that is so devoid of that sense of Ubuntu?
Okay, well, this is a very fundamental question, and actually, the colonizers, the slave masters, they understood clearly that education is the key. Once you control people's mind, you don't need to worry about all the others. I'm actually working on a piece saying that Karl Marx was only partially right. The economy is important, but it's education that is more fundamental, because when you miseducate, to use the term of an African-American scholar, Carter Woodson, when you miseducate them to acquire the values of the oppressor, you don't need to worry. They will take care of the economy. They will extract their own resources, send them to where they were being sent before in the formal colonial time. So, but there was a reference earlier about the Congolese, whose hands, women included, whose hands were being chopped because they refused to work against their will without any compensation in the context of the slave societies that were created in colonial time. So the system of education, in fact, in the Congo, they said they had found the proper formula to educate the colonized. A little bit of education, not too much to create trouble, to make them aware of what they're suffering. They should actually celebrate being colonized, just like it was being said that the enslaved people in the Americas, they actually were welcoming. They had an opportunity to be part of the civilized world, and so on and so forth. So the education they had put together with great care was to make us, all of us, today celebrate colonization. The education of the Congo was not supposed to have produced Patrice Lumumba. The education, the post-colonial education, was not supposed to have produced Thomas Sankara. But why? This is one aspect that interests me profoundly. It means that education is planned, used to control, but it has a dimension that nobody can control. As the philosopher Kizerbo said, teach them how to read, control what they read, but once they know how to read, they will read other things. So that we are not supposed to be having this conversation, because we are part of this product. We are product of this system. So why are we having this conversation? It means this education has that component that gives us hope, that we can create spaces to really critically think of what is happening, how to control, how to take back our own mind and think of the future. So then the system will not say, well, it's time now, we let you do what you want. It will not happen. But we use that property of the education, that there is always a little space there that it cannot be fully controlled by those in power. So that's why we need to nurture that. We need to expand it. And we need to reassure everybody that it is in our collective interest to actually go that way instead of continuing with the oppression, exploitation.
That's powerful. Gegeletso, I have a question. I'm somewhat paraphrasing here, and I'm sorry if I am untidy, but I was looking at the comments and I read one by Utami Mazwai. He was asking a question that I've always been curious about. You come in representing Azapo. I myself am a child of Azapo. So I understand the history and I understand its relevance, but in today's time, with the way our political system has played itself out, and here I'm asking Gegeletso, I'm also it's really an open question, but is the political framing, the way that it works, that people come in, they vote, they're in voting, they give you a voice, in having that voice, you then have a mandate and you move forward with it. Is this the most appropriate way for the Black consciousness movement to live? Does it not necessarily straitjacket what should be a movement and makes it a political system that operates within a very framed, very intentional, very restrictive system that, as you both so well articulate, is not necessarily meant for the freedom of our people, for the dignity of our people, is not actually meant to build Azania in any way. So when we're participating in political formations, how are we going to ensure that we do not kill the movement by creating a political party out of it? Is Gegeletso, has Eskom won over her?
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, which is fine.
Okay, fantastic. I was just laughing because the South is so very political, and it's a very poignant question, because I think it's a question that we've been asking ourselves as a movement also, to say, should we really be entering electoral politics? And although it's not the ideal platform for us to express ourselves, it is a platform that does provide a voice. And we have come to realize that being outside of that space denies us the voice and the reach required to be able to articulate the frustrations of our people. So I will agree with you that I think in the manner that I describe Black consciousness for me, I describe it in a spiritual way. I describe it as a way of being. I describe it as a path. So it's a philosophy, it's a spiritual philosophy that I live by, more than it is, something that I would say a political movement. So Black consciousness for me is not a political movement, but it is a spiritual guide, and it's also an anchor in a system that, dehumanizes me every day. It is that thing that restores my humanity and allows me to continue. But it is also a foundation from which I base my politics, because the truth of the matter is that we do need to be politically active. We do need to influence the conversation and the policies. We do need to understand that we live in a world, or in a dispensation, which may, in as much as is not favorable, it is a dispensation that is currently active in the country, one that we need to pull down, but we cannot pull down by being outside of it. It's a very uncomfortable place, but unfortunately, we do need to get into the ring to box for our people, because at this point, no one is in that space boxing for our people. So as much as I think that parliamentary politics really do betray the very essence of us trying to pull down the system, at this point, Azapo finds itself having to go into parliamentary politics to go and box for our people, because nobody is speaking for Black people. Nobody is speaking to restore the dignity of Black people. Nobody is influencing policy, but even education policy, towards ensuring that the education of the Black child will be the kind of education that will ensure that the Black child will eventually be able to free themselves. So as uncomfortable as electoral politics are, it is a space that we need to go into and box in.
Fair enough. You're saying if there's a fight and if it's happening outside, go outside, and if staying indoors is not always going to be the thing that helps you win your fight. I hear you. I'm just here looking at some of the comments. There seem to be a lot of comments on this idea of education, and I think the idea of being able to.
May I interrupt you? May I interrupt you?
Yes, please, sir. Yes, please,
I just want to make just one little point in support of what Kekeles was saying. I think another way of putting it is to say that we have to dirty our hands. And the only question is, in what way do we do that? This organization, AZAPO, that Kekeles represent on this program here tonight, refused to participate in the negotiations in 1994, precisely because it was absolutely clear that what was being negotiated was a sellout agreement for our people. But we had already been an organization and a political organization. So I want to draw a distinction between being a political organization that embodies politically in terms of organization and conscientization and recruitment and formalizing structurally how Black consciousness may achieve its objective. That is a very important thing to do, whether or not you end up in parliament. And I'm leaving the ending up in parliament as an open question. But I want to open up the question of the Black consciousness philosophy is not the preserve of the Black consciousness organizations. And there are several Black consciousness organizations in existence. It is not, we do not hold a monopoly on the Black consciousness philosophy. We need to take cognizance of the fact that there is a movement driven, as Kekeles will say, by the philosophy of Black consciousness. The last time I was with Steve Biko, just before he died, the last conversation I had with him was when, in fact, he had left. He was under restriction in King Williamstown, and I was in Umtata with other people, and he was not supposed to have been out of King Williamstown. But he pitched up at an event where a few of us were receiving Comrade Mapeta Mohapi and his wife that had just been released from prison. And he arrived, as Steve would arrive, in ways that only Steve knew, and came there and addressed us for no more than about 15 minutes. And the kernel of his message was the Black consciousness movement is more important than you comrades here who are here, and is bigger than yourselves. And he left, he disappeared. We didn't know why he came and where he came from. And that was the last time I was with him. And I believe that Black consciousness is bigger than ourselves. It is an asset of our people. It is an asset without which this country cannot free itself. Even for people who are outside the Black consciousness, parties and organization. It is the soul of our nation. It is the only indigenous philosophy in this country. This, together with the gift that we got from Sobukwe, are the only things that will liberate this country. But I would like to say that we must accept that BC is wider, bigger, greater than us, and that there are more and many people who identify with and support the Black consciousness philosophy, who may choose not to be part of us as AZAPO and the BCMU. And we must accept that and embrace those people and encourage them to support this, because we must overturn the current structures that are ruling over our people at the moment, because they've shown themselves for what they are. And so our focus must be to bring power to Black people through the organizations of Black people. I'm sorry I over-added.
No,
My point was
I
just to add to what Kekelet was
to what
saying.
you're saying. No, I appreciate that. And here I'm going to be a slightly nepotistic. I see my father is on the prowl here. But he's saying, Professor Masala, this is Isham Kabela, he's saying Professor Masala speaks about the BC movement as being an action movement. Where is this movement today? This morning he gave me a big lecture about this, where he was saying, well, it's not supposed to be something that you just feel and think, but today, if we had to point, and actually not just point at the breakdowns, but look at people who see themselves as within the Black consciousness movement and say, where are we now? Where are we visible? Where are we acting? Where are we moving? Is it in the trade unions? Is it creating another Zanimpilo? Where, or are we still in that lull where we believe that someone else is responsible for fixing it? And I think Gekeleso in her utterances had said, at some point we will have to give up our kind of petty bourgeois lifestyles and take to the streets. And I wonder if our home loans and our car loans have not tied us so hard that we actually, one, cannot take to the streets, but two, have become altogether almost invisible in terms of being able to see the action of that movement. And I mean, I'm not saying it's, yes, I am saying it's true, actually, because on the whole, we're not visible enough. And I suppose more than a question, I think this is a jab, and to say, guys, we've got to act and we've got to do, and whether it's in the education system or in how our people are living our lives, but where can, apart from what you see the state doing, what are we actively doing now? And I think, again, this is an open question.
Call to action. There's no shortage of things we can do. Young people are waiting for us in schools, in communities, in churches, universities, in work situations. They're waiting for us, not necessarily to lead them, but to join them and to share with them and to act with them and to die with them. They do get killed when they stand up and fight for something. They're killed by our own people. Yeah. Maybe it's time we get killed together with them, you know, and our people similarly. In the streets, you drive around the suburbs where the rest of us, or some of us live rather, our people are on the pavements, and when you pass, if you slow down the car, they think you are looking for somebody to pick up for work. They are permanently unemployed. We're dealing with a crisis of unemployment, crisis of poverty, crisis of inequality, crisis of violence, crisis of education, inferior education. I think that overall, if a true, good, well-researched assessment and evaluation of our education today were to be done, we might be embarrassed to feel that apart from the fact that we have been discriminated previously, we might be embarrassed to find out that our current educational system is as inferior, if probably not more inferior, than what the colonialists and the Boers were giving us. I'm ashamed to even say that.
Baba, I think what you've said is true, and I take the call. I don't know, speaking as a young person, so I have these like Old school BC parents. And one of the things they say is, why is your generation not yet willing or ready to do what was done for them? So for instance, the failed education system, in that there was a time when my mother's generation, people took their children to Swaziland and Botswana and Lesotho. They moved. In another generation, they fought. In our generation, we let our kids fail and think a condonement is okay at the end of the year. So again, I'm really asking, if we as young people are going to take on the ideas of Black consciousness, are we? I think that Mosala at the beginning said in the 70s they were prepared and ready and understood the price. Are we ever going to get to that place?
I think we are at that place, but the challenges that we have are slightly different that Mosala and them had at the time. The enemy for Ndate Mosala and Steve Biko was very clear. The issues were very black and white. It was, your enemy, you knew what your enemy looked like. Today, the enemy is hidden in so many ways. Today, the enemy looks just like you. Today, the enemy is systemic. Today, the enemy is not as obvious for us to be able to see. But I can say that our generation is seeing and is uncomfortable enough with what we are seeing, to the point that we also understand that we are at the point where we are not wanting to do what the previous generation did, which was talk, philosophize, write. We are at the point where we are looking to, like I said, create a critical mass that would literally turn this country around. And for that to happen, obviously, we need a lot more of us to have the knowledge. What is going to help us realize, Azania, really and truly, is a revolution. The kind of revolution that took place in 1976, the kind of revolution that took place in the 1970s. But that revolution, unfortunately, also requires the unity of Africa. That revolution needs us to understand that the West is not going to be happy with us deciding to take our land back, to take back our economy. And they're going to use this fear that they are going to impose sanctions on us. Those sanctions are nothing but a fear. They cannot hurt us, they cannot kill us. The truth of the matter is that Western economies are hedged on Africa. If Africa itself were to stand up and say, sharp, keep your money and keep your trade, and we will work with ourselves, we will feed ourselves, we will industrialize, actually, they are the ones that will come back hungry and begging us to open the doors for them. So the unity of Africa is critical to us realizing the vision of a liberated Azania and indeed a liberated Africa. We cannot do this by ourselves, and this is why, as young people, we are using their technology to create linkages. We are using their technology to know each other, to understand each other's problems, to understand that what is happening in Congo, to feed Facebook, to feed Elon Musk, he needs to have the minerals that are in the Congo. And so when this child comes back, that UN child comes back and says, we need renewable energy, and we are asking, you need renewable energy at whose expense? At the expense of the 12-year-olds that must go and dig those minerals so that you can take them out of our continent and secure the energy future of Europe. It is enough that you had colonized our people back then. We are not stupid. We can see the recolonization of Black people using technology, Facebook and Twitter. The majority of our people are working to keep Facebook, Twitter, Coca-Cola alive. We understand today the hegemony of the US and its economy on us. We understand that. We are not oblivious to it. What we are doing, though, is creating these networks that will help us to actually bring down the international system, that will help us to hold our colonizers to account. These very platforms that they have built to extract from us, we can use back to ensure that we hold them accountable for, in South Africa, for instance, these holes that they have left gaping when they were raping Mother Earth of her minerals so that they could beneficiate Europe at the expense of our people. So we can use these very platforms to build a movement, that critical mass that I was talking about, that would conscientize our people and actually allow us to spread the message of truth, because we know that we are being censored. We know that these algorithms are not designed to ensure that we can have our voice. And so we are learning programming so that we can go back into those spaces and design these algorithms so that our messages can get to our people. So we are fighting. So maybe our fight is not really entirely on the streets. We are fighting on all fronts. I can tell you for one that we are in our communities. We are fighting like Ugo Kombele, the 81-year-old woman who was arrested by this system for her not having a home. We took to the streets and we ensured that Ugo Kombele could have a home and that this very corrupt officials could be held responsible. So we are on the streets, we are on the net, we are writing, and we are doing all of these things concurrently.
Thank you so much for your responses. I think, as I said at the beginning, there's African ways of speaking, and then there's the Zoom ones. And this Zoom is 5 minutes away from the time that we've been given for this conversation. And I think if I can just give like a minute each to my very wonderful panelists to just kind of wrap up their thoughts and their ideas. I know I hardly touched most of the questions, but there was, I think, a lot of depth to the conversation that was had. Kekeletso, being the youngest, if I can just start with you, and then we'll see how we can wrap up the conversation.
I think for me, my closing remarks are quite simply, we need to remember what Steve Biko stood for. We need to remember why he died. And he didn't die so that we could drive Mercedes-Benz, just us. He didn't die so that we could live in the concrete jungle that we are currently live in. He died so that we could all attain freedom. He died so that we could get and restore the land to its rightful owners, so that its rightful owners could benefit from it, all of us. And we must remember, even with the concept of Ubuntu, that I am because you are, and all is not well with me unless all is well with my neighbor. All is not well with my brother, and all is not well with my sister. And therefore, it is my responsibility to do what I can to ensure that we realize the Azania that we all need to be able to live in.
Thank you so much, my sister. Prof, if I can please allow you to please close us, just your final remarks from the conversation we've just had.
Yeah, it's hard to have final remarks, but forward-looking, it's really critical. And then there was a question in the chat about the formal education and the Ubuntu. Well, it has been a misconception that our education, because of his philosophy, doesn't have the formal dimension. It does. So what we need to do is to, even when the system is still in place, how do we include conscience-raising content so that many of our young people are very savvy when they are given the opportunity with the technology, but they need to know how they can use the technology to play their part. So this dimension, as part of the transition to a system that will be more global, more encompassing, we need to do that in whatever space is given to us. And quickly, I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to teach from the Africana Studies, a space that was created precisely to change the American Academy, to create a space where people of African descent can propose a curriculum, can teach, can contribute to the production of knowledge and how you use that knowledge. So these are some ideas, and we will continue the conversation and the effort to transform our society and the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ma. I really appreciate that. Ndada Masala.
Briefly, Ngwaneso, thank you so much. I think I should thank you and thank the organizers We should thank also I see you had more than 100 people participating in this program. I think this is great. I think we have no option. It is the fourth industrial revolution context in which we are. There are ways of reaching people, and this was one of the best ways of doing it. In terms of the future, my word is there's no substitute for action. And there are many sides of struggle. Let's identify the multiple sides of struggle. Let's not wait for 12 September 2023. That is actually already late. If you don't know how this country has been eaten away at the moment, it's been eaten away systematically, and we never know whether we will find it again a year from now. So I would say back to struggle, back to action, find multiple sides of struggle, find issues, fight for the people every day and with the people every day.
Great. Thank you so much, Ndate. I can say to UKZN, I think this platform is so important, and I think making it online, making it live, going forward, this is an important day and something that I'm so grateful that the university and Sis Noma Zondo continues to create space for. I'd like to thank Pamela and Adams for making sure that all of us and all the different parts came together in the way in which they were supposed to. Thank you so much for organizing the event. Also, Linda Wakutwana, who is the Umdapo chairperson of the board. Really, I think the work you do is unsung, and where we can and when we can, we will have to be able to say thank you. Sis Noma, I think I'm going to give the program back to you, and I thank you so much for being gracious and allowing me and allowing us to have this conversation and to honor the memory of Steve Biko 45 years on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, facilitator, for doing such a great job. I thought someone from the Umtapo board was going to do the closing. Pamela?
Norma, you can just close the webinar now.
Oh, okay. No, thank you, everyone. I mean, especially to our speakers for such an enlightening discussion. It's always great to engage on this platform with everyone. And I do agree that I think this will be the future in terms of us reaching out to as many people as possible through this platform. We are as a university looking into doing this kind of events going forward, and also to actually at some point do blended events, so we can also because a lot of people now want to actually engage physically, so we'll also have a blended approach in these kinds of discussion, because we have to continue with the discussions. We know that this shouldn't be ending here as a discussion. There are a lot of things that we can do as a community in all our spaces to make change and to drive change in everything that we do. As Steve Biko stand for, was fighting inequality, and we have to continue, as we know that there's still a lot of inequality in our societies, that we still have to continue with the fight in trying to make sure that we serve humanity in everything that we do. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking your time, and it's actually amazing that people stayed in and until the end. And to our amazing speakers, thank you so much for agreeing to come to this platform to engage with our audience. And no, we always come knocking at your doors, and you always honor our invitation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.